Tamers and DigiDestined. It's Mike, aka Sinaku from Overground, and today, welcome to episode, I believe, 5 now today, of How I Became a DigiDestined. It's late for me, but not for our guest, Connor, who's coming to us live from Australia. So say hello, Connor.
Hello.
Let everyone know where you're from and what you do.
Hi, everybody. As Tanaku's just said, I'm from Australia. I run a Digimon Card Game podcast called the Memory Gauge Podcast. And I've done a few other things. I've kind of done a couple of live streams and actually commentated on the USA versus Spain H Gaming and some other company I don't actually know event with Tanaku, which is kind of how we came to know each other and how this kind of came about. So yeah, done a few things in the Digimon Card Game space.
Wonderful. But pretty much what you're known for in terms of the Digimon community is primarily the Memory Gauge podcast, which is what you host.
Yeah.
There you go.
That'd be the big one.
So today, today Connor is here. He is our guest on this week's edition of the podcast to talk about his experience with Magic the Gathering. So we'll jump right into it. So Connor, tell us a bit about your Magic background.
It's been a bit of an on and off relationship for me, but a pretty long one. I was first introduced to Magic, would have been in, I guess, I would have been maybe 11 or 12. A friend of mine introduced me to it. He had a bunch of cards. I'm not sure what set it was from, one of the really, really old ones. And basically we were just hanging out at his place. He's like, hey, I've got this game. Would you be interested? And we sat down. He sort of taught me a little bit about how to play. I'm sure I did very, very poorly, but something about it just instantly clicked. It was like, cards on a table. This is my jam. Mm-hmm. And that kind of snowballed a little bit from there. I asked for a couple of... I got some of my own cards. I think this was back, for people in the know, this is probably back around original Ravnica times. So, like, not the last Ravnica and not the Ravnica before that, but the first one way back when.
Yeah, the Ravnica, it's come on repeat a few times, isn't it?
It's pretty popular. Yeah, they do keep going back. It's probably one of the most popular players.
Yeah.
So, and it's just kind of gone from there. It's pretty expensive as a hobby, as all trading card games are, so I wasn't always able to sort of feed it a little bit, and I sort of tried to get into it and then came off it and went to a few other games. But my big sort of love affair with Magic came when I got into Commander, and this was probably 3 or 4 years ago now. I came back, a couple of friends of mine sort of like said, hey, we've got Commander at our local game store on Wednesdays. I was like, okay, that sounds interesting, looked a bit into it, and then that was like, oh, okay, so I don't have to keep buying new cards, really. I can like put something together and it's just good forever because it's an eternal format as opposed to the standard rotation, which I had been sort of dabbling with at the time. And that was where it was like, okay, I can do this because I don't have to constantly be putting money or effort into learning new cards. I can kind of set something up, and if I need to, go away. But as it turned out, I never went away, and I'm still playing Commander pretty regularly now.
So what is Commander exactly for those unfamiliar?
Okay, so for those unfamiliar with it, Magic the Gathering is a great game because it's got kind of different ways to play as well, and the players like to create new kind of variants. So whereas usually you'll play with, I think it's a 60 card deck, it's been a while, in the standard format, Commander is a 100 card format, so your deck is 100 cards. It's also what's called a Highlander format. Yeah, a huge stack of cards, really difficult to shuffle. And it's also a Highlander format, so you can only have you can have one of any card. Yeah, so 100 unique cards in a deck that you then play. It's also a multiplayer format, so you play it against 3, 4, 5, 6 opponents. So it's not just a one-on-one game format. You sit down across the table from a full table of 3, 4 other people to play and each take it in turns. And then the other key thing, which it's named after, is of course the Commander. So you've got 100 cards, unique, playing against multiple people, and your deck has what's called a Commander. So you pick one creature that has the legendary type, meaning it's kind of a unique named character within the world of the game, and that is your Commander. And in Magic, like Digimon, like most other card games, all the cards are sort of divided into colors. So Magic has white, blue, black, red, green. So your legendary creature will be one of those 5 or a mix. And then you can only use cards that are those colors. So if your Commander is white and red, you can only use white cards, red cards, or white and red cards. So it's very kind of limited. You really need to...
I see, okay.
Yeah, so you're really sort of... You can draw from the whole history of the game. It's sort of what's called an eternal format. So cards from right at the start all the way up to cards that were released last month are fair game, except for some bans. But the big limitation is, that you have that commander creature, which sits in a special zone that's not quite your hand. It's actually on the game field, but you can't really affect it with anything, but you always have access to it. So it's as if you draw it into your hand at the start of every game, and you can always get it back. And then you have to build your deck sort of around that, which I find really, really interesting. So you'll look at the text on the card, and it gives you kind of guidance for how to build that deck. And I like, the limits I really like. It forces you to think outside the box because not every deck can have every color. So you've got to sort of strategize a little bit about what you want to put in. I like the fact that cards don't rotate out. So the cards I used to collect back in the old Ravnica days I can still use, and cards I picked up from the game shop yesterday I can use and mix them all together and get all these weird and wacky things because they were never meant to be used together. They were designed like decades apart, and then you throw them on the table together and see what happens, and usually it's something stupid that requires like 5 minutes of discussion to figure out what's actually going to happen because there's 4 people and all kinds
ruling
of things
nightmares.
snowballing. Oh yeah, huge ruling nightmares, but really, really fun. And of course the multiplayer aspect is really, really cool, because you sit down with like not just one of your friends, but all of your friends, and you're all in the same game, and you're all watching these kind of wacky things happen. And it's a bit more social and tends to be a bit more casual. It is getting a little bit more competitive recently, but mostly the vibe is kind of casual, and people are like, I built this deck and the whole point of it is to get myself to 0 life as soon as possible, but stay alive with like this weird card from some long ago set. Let's see if I can do that. And you're like, yeah, let's see if you can do that. That'll be cool. And then they do it. And even if you lose, you're like, you did the weird thing. That was really, really cool. I don't even, like, you look back on your favorite Commander games and you rarely remember who won. You just remember the awesome thing that happened. And that's something that I really, really like about that.
And is this an officially supported format, or is this kind of more fan supported?
So this was fan created. It was created originally by, I believe there were a set of judges who would go to big standard tournaments and judge the events, and then afterwards, they'd be there for multiple days. They'd be milling around together. They wanted something to play that was like not standard. Basically, they wanted something a little bit different, and so this format kind of grew. They sort of developed it and tweaked it. This core group of sort of judges. Sheldon Menery was a big name in that group who kind of kicked it off, but there were a few other people, and so it was originally sort of fan made. But slowly over time, it's grown and grown and grown. And I think very, very recently, Mark Rosewater, who's sort of I think he's the head designer of the game and one of the main sort of faces of the company that makes it, Wizards of the Coast, has come out and said that officially now, Commander is the most played format in Magic. It's overtaken Standard. It's overtaken any other way of playing Magic. It's the most popular way that people play it, because I think stuff doesn't rotate, and it's kind of, you're playing with 4 people, you get a lot more people involved, so there's all these good things about it that have made it the most popular format. And now Wizards makes pre-constructed decks for Commander. They've released sets exclusively for Commander. Like, the cards can't be played in any other format. They're cards designed and released for Commander. They recently did Commander Legends, which was a booster draft set where you drafted a Commander deck. It was built specifically to mix draft and Commander into one sort of unholy mashup that worked, but it was good. It was a good set, but it was definitely they went out on a limb, and there were a few things that people were a bit concerned about with the construction of that. But I think it was actually a really good set. So it's officially supported now, but when it started, and it was not created by Wizards, it's just been sort of adopted. It was originally Elder Dragon Highlander way back. Now it's Commander, but you'll still see people call it EDH as well.
I've heard of EDH, yes, so that's actually the same.
Yeah, Commander and EDH.
Okay. I've just walked into a game store and I've heard someone say, "Want to play EDH?" And I was just like, "I guess that's a Magic thing," and I just kind of kept walking. But that's interesting now that I actually heard of that in myth and legend of the past, and now it's kind of come full circle, which is
yeah, it's come right around. It's
so I'm
known as Commander, but EDH.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so I'll talk briefly about my experience with Magic because my introduction to it kind of came at a bit of a pivotal moment, I guess, in my life, because as many of my listeners know, and you might, especially since we discussed this briefly when we were commentating the event, most of my card game experience comes from Yu-Gi-Oh! I've been in Yu-Gi-Oh! It's 2021 now, so it's 16 years as opposed to the 15 years I was kind of preaching last year, I guess. Time has no meaning now in quarantine, so I don't know what year it is anymore. But 16 years now. And but I was kind of introduced to Yu-Gi-Oh! Competitively at the same time as being introduced to Magic in general. So this was when I was in high school, which was way longer now than I care to admit. But it was, I believe, Lorwyn, I believe was the set.
Oh man.
Yeah, it was like the Lorwyn block. And I remember there was like, I want to say Morning Shade or something to that effect was down the road,
Lorwyn,
or Shadow Moor or
Morning
something like that.
Tide, Shadow Moor. I think there was maybe
Morning
one
Tide.
more in
There you go.
there. I can't remember. There was, yeah, back when they
Yeah.
used to
So
do blocks rather than just singular sets released by themselves. Oh man,
yeah.
that's a
So
throwback.
so there's a game. There's a game store at Ryman, Ontario called Black Knight Games, and they were just down the street from my high school. So during our lunch breaks or our free periods, we would just march on down there, and we would buy pretty much a starter deck of every single card game that they had. So I'm talking, we bought Yu-Gi-Oh, we bought Magic, we bought Universal Fighting System,
Ooh.
we bought like that. If you remember what that is, oh geez, I can't even remember the other one now. Some sort of Star Wars game, but I cannot remember the name of it to save my life. But yeah, we would just spend all of the money we got from our crappy part-time jobs just buying card games, and out of kind of the majority of stuff that we just kind of grabbed and gravitated towards, Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic were the two games that kind of spoke with us the most. So it's funny because there's a trio of us, my friends Matt and Jeff, and Matt was leaning heavily towards Yu-Gi-Oh and Jeff was leaning heavily towards Magic. So I always had kind of a play partner in both camps. But with Magic, I like dragons. That's kind of like my thing. So if a game has dragons, I'm going to play dragons.
Yeah,
And
nice.
at that time, and I don't remember Lauren having a lot of dragons per se, but I gravitated heavily towards the blue color specifically.
Yeah.
Um, and that had a lot of like, that was like the counter spells and the drawing and the scrying, so you can like kind of see what you were getting down the road. And I really enjoyed that. And I never really played Magic competitively, but I played it kind of enough with my friends, and it kind of helped me with the building blocks of how I would approach TCGs in the future. And to this day, actually, like in this cabinet behind me, I have a bunch of like starter decks still. So I have like the Jace versus Syndra decks. I have a Sliver like special edition deck that
Slivers. Oh,
like
yeah.
every so often when they come out with like 2-player decks, I generally pick them up. So that way it's just something to have in the house if we're ever in the mood. So
Yeah.
know how to play Magic. However, if you give me a competitive deck of the 2020s, struggle. And but yeah, so and since this is a series in which we kind of talk about how we transition and how we kind of take the philosophies of previous card games to Digimon specifically, I'll just say that one of the main things about Magic that I brought with me to Digimon, well, that I brought with me to other card games as well down the road, is that Magic is a game that's heavily rooted in resource management.
Ooh, yeah.
And to be honest, that's one of the one things about Magic that I hated the most. I hated knowing that I need to draw these goddamn land cards, and if I didn't have them, I couldn't play the game. And that philosophy kind of translated with me into Pokemon later too, where I'm just like, oh, I need energy cards, but if I don't see my energy cards, how do I win? And then so that's why I kind of stuck with Yu-Gi-Oh for all these years, because it's just like I don't need to draw all these outside sources. I can just play my cards as is. But now going into Digimon, where we have the memory gauge and it's built, the resource system is baked directly into the game. One of your caliber coming from Magic specifically, how did you kind of process the transition from needing physical resources to having passive resources kind of in play at all times? Do you feel like that is an improvement to a game design, or do you feel like that's a detriment in that it actually improves deck building to have those resources as a part of the actual gameplay?
Oh man. I'm a big fan of any game that doesn't need, as you say, like a sort of external card as a resource. Back in the day, I used to play Duel Masters when it was briefly around. That was a big part of
Mm-hmm.
why I liked that, because any card in your hand could be a resource. But I think it definitely it improves your ability as a gamer a bit. It's an interesting thing to have to think about, to have to manage your lands. It's definitely helps you improve your deck building a lot, because you have to sort of it helps you to think about ratios of cards that you're playing. So it was a pretty easy transition to me from Magic deck building over to Digimon deck building and getting the hang of the ratios between like level 3s, level 4s, level 5s, level 6s, because it's a very similar kind of thing. You sort of have a deck, it's got X amount of cards, and you know that you need roughly this number of lands in order to sort of see one every turn, or roughly every turn, and be able to sort of keep up with your resource management. So that knowing how to do that and having practiced that for a while, then coming to Digimon and being like, okay, I need a certain amount of level 3s, it was kind of easier maybe for me than other people possibly, or Magic players, to pass that idea of like, I need a certain number of level 3s, and they're kind of the memory gauge is your resource, but your level threes are also kind of a resource because they're your card draw because you're putting them down on your level twos. You're getting sort of cards to your hand. They're your starting point to build up to your bigger Digimon. They're sort of the base of your deck. So that part of it, I think, definitely translated really, really well. But then it is also interesting. There's something I really love about the Digimon thing of like, I have nothing else to do, so I can still drop this big this level 6 straight to the field, and it gives my opponent a lot of resources, but I can still do it. I'm never stuck. Whereas Magic, sometimes you're just stuck. You get a bad draw, and unlike in Digimon, where at least you're like, oh, I'm hard playing stuff, you're at least getting things on the field. In Magic, you can get stuck and not physically not be able to put things onto the field, which is way worse. So I think it also has helped me be better at dealing with those sort of bricked hands because coming from a game where you can literally like the game rules will not allow you to put anything down, coming to a game where the worst thing that's going to happen is you can put something down and give your opponents a lot of resources, it's a little bit nicer, a little bit kinder than maybe the Magic Lands system. So there is a bit of translation. It's obviously a very different system, but I think some of the core sort of ideas and the core things that you have to think about definitely translate over really interestingly in terms of the resource management.
And now conversely, I'm gonna let you picture this. You're in an alternate reality now, where you're playing Magic, and every time you play a creature, give your opponent that much land.
Ooh, man, you don't want to play anything.
Do you think? Yeah, would you think the gameplay aspect of Magic as a whole would be completely turned on its head? Would that break the game, or would that make the game a lot more strategic?
Oh, if you were giving your opponent land, I don't know that it would break it necessarily because they would also be giving you land. But the thing about land is it's a resource that stays. The memory gauge is kind of a back and forth, and sometimes you've got 5 memory, sometimes you've got 1 memory. But like with Magic, once a land is on the field, it's usually there. There are some ways to destroy lands, but a lot of people don't even like to play them because it like feels bad. Which you should play more land destruction. Just if Magic players, if you're listening, and especially Commander players, play more land destruction, targeted land destruction. Don't like play any of those cards where it's like destroy all lands because that's being just a jerk. But stuff that just says destroy target land, actually really good. Keep a couple of them in your back pocket because people played these crazy lands with like stupid effects. But yeah, the land as a permanent resource definitely makes that. I think that would. If the game was designed around that, it probably wouldn't break it because they take it into account. But I don't know how you would even manage that. Like, play a card, your opponent gets a land every time. There's some cards that are like that, and you've really got to weigh up. Like, does my deck need this? This has to be awesome in my deck because giving your opponent a resource that's going to stick around and accrue them value over the course of a game rather than just on one turn is like a huge swing, sort of. So. Ugh, that gives me like the bad shivers to think about. No, I don't want to. I don't want to give my opponent land. Ugh.
That's what I'm saying. Like, just it's one of those Twilight Zone moments. Like, picture this.
Oh, definitely Twilight Zone. I can picture myself screaming at the end, and Ron Sterling's like, "Oh yeah, it was not good."
So I want to talk about the color distribution of Magic and kind of how, for me at least, as again coming from someone who has experience with Magic but not necessarily that kind of deep, intimate relationship with it. I found when it came to Digimon, because obviously every card game is always going to kind of cherry pick and borrow elements from other card games. And I feel as Magic being kind of the progenitor of the modern card game that we see today, what Digimon kind of cherry picked from that specifically and said, I'm going to borrow this element, was the fact that they have colors in general. They don't have the same colors. They've kind of made it to a point where each color kind of shares a similar identity to what the base color would have been in Magic. So, for example, red in Magic is very, aggressive and, burn, for example. And you see that in Digimon, whereas, the red is all about DP, and increases and security attack plus a million and all that jazz. And then you go to blue. Blue's got the, counterspell and draw power and stuff like that. And mostly like returning things to hand and manipulation and stuff like that. And you see blue and Digimon also has something similar. We don't have counterspells yet, God willing, we don't. But apparently we're getting quick play options in set 6, but that's a discussion for another day. And then green's all about ramping, I believe, as well.
Yep, ramping.
So, you get your cheap evolution cost. Yep. Black, I guess, would be Magic Black would be the equivalent to our purple, I think.
Yeah, that's probably the closest.
Where it would, you destroy your own resources to accrue advantage. And then but then the similarities kind of stop there. We don't. I guess yellow and white would be the counterparts there, I think, as well. Because
Yeah, kind of.
I guess white doesn't necessarily focus on healing though. It's mostly like giving each other buffs, and it's got the oh, what do you call it? The vigilance, I believe it's one of its main keywords as well, right?
Yeah, you see vigilance a lot in white, which is it doesn't your creature doesn't tap when it attacks, so you can declare the attack and then it stays untapped, which means that it can block as well. So pretty good.
So you could almost argue
Probably
that,
kind of reboot.
white and magic actually splits off. Yeah, I was gonna say it splits off into both kind of yellow and black
Yeah.
factions, respectively. Well, that's kind of that's kind of the first thing that I noticed about magic, and then the other main thing is summoning sickness, but that's pretty much it. So, as someone who's actually come from magic and actually has that intimate knowledge, what about Digimon did you notice as well that kind of maybe took elements from magic as well?
The thing about Magic is that because it was arguably the first trading card game, I guess not even arguably, it just was, and it's so big and such a huge force in the market. Every game that comes out, whether or not it wants to, kind of is either doing stuff that Magic has done or is kind of specifically doing things that Magic didn't do, and it's all kind of shaded by what Magic is and the things that are a part of Magic. So you always notice, like, when a game decides to go for a sort of colors system, you always kind of notice that, and yeah, you can draw similarities between the colors in Digimon and the colors in Magic, but there's obviously a lot of differences as well. As you said, they don't exactly map one for one. Like, I think that they've separated the sort of effects in Digimon really nicely and in a really interesting way that doesn't really map one to one onto any other card game, at least none that I've seen. Maybe like there's something obscure that kind of maps a bit closer, but it's not exactly one to one with the Magic colors. One big difference I noticed was more sort of a lore thing, in that I know that in Magic, characters are colors. Like, you'll have a planeswalker. It's like Gideon, for example. Gideon is a white planeswalker. And when you see a Gideon card, it is a white card. And when they make a Gideon card, they say they need to come up with some white effects that work for Gideon, because Gideon is a white card. He's always a white card. Maybe if they have a big story reason, he can add a different color, but it's got to be a huge in-story reason for that to happen, and it very, very rarely happens. And there's always an argument within the game developers about like changing colors of characters, and they need to be really specific about the characters they use. And you see in the design discussions that they have, like, because Magic, the Wizards of the Coast is really good about that, sort of putting up and letting you see sort of behind the shop window of how they make things, which is really cool. They do all kinds of articles and things, and some of the stuff they talk about is how they'll have a gap for a certain color, and you'll see the discussion is about, okay, so here's the list of characters we have who are this color, who we can slot in there. And they're very limited in which characters they can put in. And what I noticed about Digimon is they did not do that at all. There's some Digimon that are mostly one or two colors, but like Agumon, I think, has been everything at this point, or at least some version of him. Agumon and Greymon's covered. Definitely, I've seen red, green, yellow with the sort of the War Greymon that's really big at the moment. Black, we've seen obviously just regular War Greymon in black, so he's covered the whole sort of color spectrum there. And there's a few other characters that have gone across the whole color spectrum, and it's really more about, like, rather than saying this character has these effects and is this sort of color, it's more, okay, in this card we're highlighting this aspect of this character. And it's more sort of like the red War Greymon is the War Greymon in full like attack mode, and then there's kind of the black War Greymon who's like Greymon as sort of a defender because he's a blocker and he has reboot and all that sort of stuff, which I thought was really an interesting and different way of making it. I also find that the power level of Digimon, at least at the moment, I haven't paid too much attention to the future Japanese sets. I'm trying to stay focused on just what's out in the English meta at the moment, so I'm not looking too far ahead. I'm not looking at the quick play options in BT6 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
The power level seems to be sort of a lot lower. Like Magic the Gathering at the moment, the most recent sets kind of power creeping a little, and there's all these kinds of crazy interactions and cards that will get you, like, you can play one card and get like 3, 4, 5 cards back. Digimon doesn't really have that. The ceiling on the cards aren't really, like, you can get a 1 for 2 maybe, or 1 for 3 if something's like on the way to being busted, but definitely the
And again, that's just how the game is designed to kind of limit those sort of interactions.
Which is good. You don't need it to be sort of all over the place nuts, right? Like, Magic does that, and that's fine for Magic, but not every game needs to be that, and Digimon's very sort of a bit more low to the ground, which I quite like as well. And then yeah, you can map other stuff
And
onto it. Like the tamers seem to be kind of
mm,
enchantments, sort of, in that they're ongoing
mhm.
effects that stay on the field. You've got the options, which are kind of your instants and sorceries. Really, they're one-time effects, and the creatures are Digimon and da da da. But a lot of that's a bit superficial, and you can kind of say that about any trading card game because Magic was kind of the progenitor of everything. I'm doing a lot of hand stuff. Magic just laid the groundwork for a lot of stuff, and it just kind of makes sense as well. It's not even just that people are cribbing Magic. It's just that like Richard Garfield figured out a lot of things that really work in that kind of card game space, and people are hard pressed to
Mm.
move away from it just because it works. Like so much of it just worked right out of the gate.
I feel like that's almost a detriment to future card games that want to come out, because since Magic laid so many bricks and laid that groundwork, it feels like everyone's always taking a piece from it, or taking a page from their playbook to some capacity, and so it's hard to find some originality in card games in general. But I feel like Digimon's pretty done a good job at kind of standing up on their own. Yeah, and the next thing I want to talk about in terms of, again, as a Magic player yourself, talking about how certain cards interact with each other in the Magic game itself.
Mhm.
We talked about Ravnica briefly, and I actually entered back into Magic again a bit more often during the first Ravnica reboot, which was the Return to Ravnica, I
Yeah.
believe, where I entered a pre-release, and I got was red blue?
Yeah, is it?
Yeah, and I pulled this like legendary rare dragon card, and I was like, this is awesome. Of course I'm going to play this. My point that I'm getting to with
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is that Ravnica was a big focus on multicolor and dual colors specifically, and kind of pairing up colors in a specific sense to kind of unlock different strategies. Do you think that as a game, Digimon could introduce dual colors? And if so, what do you think those would look like in terms of certain color combinations?
Oh man, I this is such good timing because the most recent episode of the podcast I just did was all about like hybrid decks in the Digimon card game. I talked about how to build a multicolor deck in 1.0 when we kind of speculated a little bit about what's coming down the road in terms of multicolor. I know that we've seen a few cards that kind of count as more than one color. It has that text that sort of says during your turn, this card, like it might be a yellow card, and it says during your turn, this
Yeah,
card is
yeah.
also blue. So we've seen like some of that stuff is starting to come through, and it makes sense because at a certain point, keeping everything divided and having it so that people can only really play a red deck, a blue deck, a green deck, a black deck, a yellow deck, a purple deck, and that's kind of it, and then just minute variations in there. Won't last forever. Eventually, people are going to want to mix their two favorite colors, their three favorite colors, whatever it might be. And I think the game will naturally, at some point, it's going to play in that space because it's a great design space. There's a lot you can do with it. It's going to get there at some point.
The reason I'm asking that is because we're already starting to see, just even as early as set one Omnimon, for example, we have so many cards that can digivolve onto multiple colors. So I feel like maybe that's the answer to a dual color card. But I'm wondering if specifically creating a dual color card now kind of unlocks Pandora's box, because let's say I have a card that's like, I don't know, blue green, but now if a card evolves on a blue, or if I have a card that evolves from blue in my hand or a card that evolves from green in my hand, I can put either one of them on top of this Digimon. Do you feel like that is kind of detrimental from a design perspective, or do you think that that actually could potentially be kind of unlocking the door to better deck building and better interactions?
Oof. I mean, you've definitely got to tread carefully. One of the main sort of things that the Digimon designers have in their back pocket is the fact that color limitations sort of inherently limit the power level of cards. If you can only play a card sort of with green cards around it, like it's a green card, it can only be played really with green cards because it needs to digivolve from green into green, whatever it might be. That kind of inherently limits it because your card pool is limited. You know what the other green cards people will be playing. It kind of limits the number of effects. And once you start to spread that out and say you can play this card with multiple different colors, that becomes something that if you're not careful with the power level of those cards can be really hard to put a cap on again. Because if it's something that goes in every deck, then it becomes kind of goes beyond staple and becomes just everybody needs to have four of these because it goes in everything and it's strong and like there's no reason not to play it. You need a good reason not to play it. And I guess the Magic equivalent of that would be the colorless cards, especially artifacts. These are cards that have no color, so you can play them with any kind of land, any kind of mana, and so they go sort of in every deck. And generally, the limit is that they're not as strong as cards that are a specific color. They'll do sort of weaker versions of that effect. But I think they had a problem with, there was an artifact-based set, Kaladesh, I believe it was, where it was like, they were like, people love artifacts. Artifacts are cool flavor-wise. Let's make a set that's kind of about artifacts. The problem with that is that you have to make your artifacts stuff that people want to play. So they edged up a little bit in how strong they were, and they went in every deck. And so, not necessarily in that limited environment, but all of a sudden in Commander and in the Eternal formats, you've got this big influx of cards that go in every deck that have good effects, and there's no limit to. There's not a limit on like playing them. There's no I want to play this effect, but then I need to put in red lands or whatever it is. You can just put it in, and that was something that I think, in retrospect, the Magic designers have looked back on and said, "Oh, that was like a bit iffy as a decision. Maybe we shouldn't have gone so hard on the power level of the artifacts." And so I think that when you go into multicolor and cards that exist as more than one color in Digimon, I think that's the risk you run. If they're too good, they run the risk of like just being go in everything for of everyone's got to play it, which makes the format a little bit more boring because everyone's playing kind of the same cards. That said, I do think that multicolor is a really good idea because it's popular. Like Ravnica is the most popular Magic set by far. People love multicolor stuff. They love mixing colors. So it's popular. People want to see it. And it sort of, as I said in my episode, I talked about it opens up your potential deck pool kind of exponentially, not exponentially necessarily because you've got 6 colors, but it opens it up hugely. All of a sudden, instead of sort of 6 or 7 potential decks, the blue deck, yellow, red, green, purple, black, you've got the red, black, the red, green, the red, blue, the red, yellow, huge, all, even just by making it so that you can play 2 colors at a time, you massively increase the potential number of decks you're seeing. So it creates a lot of variety, which I think is the lifeblood of any card game, is a good amount of variety. So yeah, I think overall it's a good thing. I just hope that they're really careful with how powerful they make certain cards, especially if like it's a card that counts as yellow and blue, it goes in the blue black deck, the blue green deck, the yellow purple deck, the yellow like it goes so many places.
Yeah, no, that's what you're saying
with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So what you're saying basically is that we need cards that are powerful enough to increase the variety of playable decks, but not powerful enough to the point where it becomes a staple in pretty much everything, worldwide.
Yes, it can't be the best version of that effect.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be like
there needs to be
it's got to be a card that's yellow and blue that's a little bit weaker than a straight yellow or straight blue card, I think is the way to do it.
Yeah.
I think if it's a yellow card
there needs to be
that level that gives something
native color.
Yeah, like if there's a yellow card at that level that gives minus 6,000, and that's the kind of level that effect runs at, then a blue yellow card at the same level can give minus 4,000, minus 3,000. It's got to be a little bit worse. Because the benefit of being able to play that effect in blue and not have to worry about the fact that you're playing a yellow Digimon because it's also blue is, I think, that's a huge bonus.
I feel like that sort of aspect, though, in the game would be a lot more fun in terms of a learning how to play around certain things, because now you say, okay, I know you're playing blue, but now that I know that there are blue, black, blue, yellow, blue, red cards, I also have to now worry about, playing around this specific card if you so choose to tech it. So it forces players to be in a position where they're constantly respecting a wider number of cards. And I feel like formats like that are a lot more skill intensive. So I'm excited to see if the design team can kind of teeter that line and kind of balance it properly.
We've seen already that they're willing to do sort of limits on hidden potential discovered and that kind of thing. We've seen that they're sort of ready to ban or limit cards. I would not be surprised if amongst the first big push of multicolored cards, at least one of them gets hit with being limited. I'm not going to say that will definitely happen, but I want to put it out there now. They'll do a multicolor set.
On record.
One of those cards is getting limited. 100%. It will happen.
Yeah.
So yeah,
and it's funny you mentioned that because that's literally the next topic of discussion I was turning to. Okay. I was going to talk about how Magic both has set rotation in terms of the block structure, but they also have a ban list that they put out. I'm not sure the frequency, but at least every so often. Do you think Digimon, and I ask this in pretty much every episode, do you think Digimon would benefit from rotation or just the limited list that we see now, or a combination of both?
I mean, there's pros and cons to both of them, obviously. I guess the reason that I fell into Commander was I love the idea that your cards never no one ever just says you can't play these unless they get banned, but no one ever just says they're too old, you can't play them anymore. You can constantly keep playing your old cards. You can go away from the game and come back and use the deck that you had when you left, and it's still viable, maybe not viable, but legal, and like you can rock up and play it without having to reinvest and rebuild and sort of recollect everything. which is an aspect I like. So I would appreciate if Digimon kept away from rotation and many years down the line we were still able to use those cards. But as you add more cards, if you're not rotating things out, then there's a huge number of interactions you've got to be worried about. There's a huge number of potential problems that you've got to be aware of. So it is very difficult to move forward designing new cards and not accidentally break something because of a card you designed 4 years ago that you kind of put out of your mind or didn't consider. Especially because as a designer, you've got a limited amount of time and resources to devote to checking every interaction to make sure everything's okay. And then you put it out to the community, which is many, many times bigger than any design team you could ever hope to create, and way more dedicated with thousands and thousands and thousands more hours of time to devote to just breaking your stuff. So if there's going to be something that will be broken, it will get broken. So it's definitely a lot more difficult. But the benefit of you're never aging people out of the game. You're not pricing people out of the game by forcing them to constantly update their collections. So you're keeping people in even when they can't afford to constantly update. I think that's a big plus. The ban list is tough because often the cards that get banned, your cards that get banned aren't like your vanilla 3-drops. They're always the cool, powerful, splashy cards. Generally, they'll be a bit more expensive. People invest the money, maybe the time to try and find them, and then it just gets banned. Nope, can't use it. And that can feel really, really bad. And we've seen in other games that actually really puts people off the game because they invest this time and money into collecting these cards, and then the game just says, nah, sorry, we made a mistake when we designed it. You can't play it anymore. It's too powerful. And the rotation, I guess, kind of limits that because there's a lot less potential for cards to get broken because you're working with a smaller card pool. There's fewer interactions to worry about as you're designing stuff. And it also keeps power creep from going too much, I find, when you've got a rotation versus when you've got eternal. Because eternally, if your cards aren't kind of getting better and better, why would I play them versus the cards that I got when I first started? If the new cards that are coming out are kind of exactly the same power level wise and viability as the cards that I got way back when, why am I investing the money in new stuff? I can just play my old stuff and it'll be totally fine. So the incentive to power creep, which is not, can be a really bad thing. The incentive there is huge versus rotation. The incentive to power creep is kind of taken out a little bit because people need to update their cards anyway. Their cards are getting too old. They need to get new cards anyway. So you're not worried about appealing to them too much with cool stuff. It's more just make something that's balanced and fun. So there's definitely pros and cons to both. Which would I like personally for Digimon? Mm-hmm. As a commander player, mainly, I think I would love to see it just continue with the ban list versus the rotation. I love the idea of being able to use these cards for a very, very long time. I love the idea of a collection that sort of grows rather than moving along. I love the idea that I can keep my old cards and maybe one day down the line, all of a sudden, a card that was useless in the format it came out in, all of a sudden in a new set comes out and you see, oh, Flareezamon is super good. Just to pick a card that's not really used at all off the top of my head. Like,
I remember him.
Yeah, like I love that idea.
Everyone dives into their boxes to try to find him.
You get that huge element of like discovery. That's one of my favorite parts of card games and why I like to play sort of the Commander Magic format over other formats. That element of like, I went back through my collection when these new cards came out and I figured out this interaction with this old card that's really cool and it was maybe not even necessarily intended, and I got to discover that because I've been with this game for so long and I'm being rewarded for like my patience and my commitment and my loyalty, and I really like that aspect. So if we can keep up with just the ban list, it's really difficult, and there are those feel bads of when your favorite card gets banned, but if the designers are careful, I think those moments will be few and far between and the rewards kind of outweigh it.
And the other thing I want to talk about too was that in terms of a limited list specifically, so with Digimon, we're receiving our first limited list effective April 1st.
Yeah.
And I believe it's March 1st for Japan. However, Japan has had these cards since the end of October. We would have only had these cards for less than 3 weeks. I know in the past Yu-Gi-Oh has done, like emergency ban lists or emergency adjustment lists when decks become too powerful and just need to kind of put something in check. Has Magic ever done something to either ban or limit a card like almost immediately on release to kind of just nip it in the bud? And do you feel that Digimon players as a whole kind of getting the boot here because they never actually got a chance to experience that deck at its full power?
Oh, this is a great question because it lets me talk about one of my favorite things about Magic from the last few years. And people who know a bit about Magic and have followed it will probably know what I'm about to talk about when we talk about cards getting banned very soon after release. What I'm going to talk about is a card called Lutri the Spell Chaser. This was from Ikoria, Lair of Behemoths, which was a set that came out. The idea was sort of big
That's really
monsters.
recent, yeah.
Very, very recent. And the idea was that you would build big
Yeah, that
monsters
was the Godzilla set, right?
and partner with monsters. Yeah. And so, as part of the sort of humans partnering with monsters thing, and because Commander is such a popular format, and in Commander, you'll remember I talked about you have a Commander always available to you as a card that you build a deck around. Wizards designers kind of thought, what if everything was Commander? And so they came up with a mechanic called Companion, and certain cards would have Companion. And what Companion was an effect on a card that said you can start the game with this outside of your deck, and if your deck conforms to certain limitations as laid out on the card, then you can cast it from outside the game into the game. So you would have to build your deck in a certain way, like only with odd converted mana costs or only with certain colors or whatever it might be. But you got access to this Companion who was always available to you, and you could cast it. And then it would go to the graveyard and all these, like, once you cast it, it was just a regular card. But it was kind of starting a game always with this card in your hand. And there was one card called Lutri the Spell Chaser. Now, this is a red-blue card. It, I believe the effect was that you couldn't have any cards that had the same name as each other. You remember Commander, that's a part of the format anyway. So basically, this card says, if you're playing Commander and you're playing red-blue, you can have this card as your companion. It starts the game in your hand, functionally. And what it did was it countered a spell. So it was a counter spell. It said counter target spell.
Oh.
So every game, you could start the game with a counter spell in your hand, ready to go. It was cheap. It was easy. All you had to do was be playing Commander and be playing those two colors. So it went in every deck. Because it wasn't in your deck, it was outside the deck. So it didn't even take up a slot. You just had a counterspell in your hand always. Direction before we go forward. I've just looked up Lutri the Spell Chaser. It copies a spell rather than countering it. So not quite a counterspell. It does, but it's still a very good.
I feel like
it's still very strong. It was banned for a good reason. I just want it before people yell at me, being like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I was going off my memory. I've looked it up. It was a copy, not a counter. I did. I just wanted to clear the air on that before people jump down my throat about getting that wrong. And so what happened was the people who organized the Commander ban list and stuff took one look at this when it was previewed, not even released. It was previewed, and they took one look at it and they said, you can't play that. They banned it before it was released.
Oh, wow.
So when you talk about cards being banned soon after release, Magic has them beat. Magic banned a card before it came out. So, am I worried about...
I'm not even mad. That's impressive.
It was super impressive. And then it turned out Companion was super busted anyway, and they went through a bunch of changes, but that was the big one, like Lutri the Spell Chaser, because no one ever got to play it. It was previewed and banned. So I'm not too worried about stuff being banned soon after, like 3 weeks after we get it, because obviously I've lived through that. And eventually, the plan is that we're mostly going to catch up to Japan, I believe. So this weird
ideally,
this weird gap we have at the moment will theoretically close. So this is only kind of a temporary thing where our cards are getting sort of banned and limited before we've even got a chance to play with them and use them. Hopefully, we'll see how long that lasts. But it is really interesting. It just puts me in mind of that story, which is one of my not a great look for the game. Obviously, not a positive story for Magic, but definitely one of my favorite sort of moments, and something that's just fun to sort of pick up on. Like, yeah, Magic banned a card before they even made it. So
it didn't even hit the printers yet.
Didn't even hit the printers. It was brutal. So yeah, I'm not too worried about the that quick turnaround, because hopefully that gap is going to close, and that's kind of when you're playing a game that's actually targeted for another audience and is being released already for that audience before you get a hold of it. That's kind of the downside that you have to live with a little bit, is that they've played the cards and they've got to make banning decisions, and those are always going to affect the whole market. So if they break it before we get it, it's just one of those things that you've kind of got to live with. It's not great. It's not super fun, but overall, I don't think it's too unhealthy for the game, really. If that gap shrinks. If that gap doesn't shrink and we're living on a 3-month delay forever, then that becomes a problem. That becomes a lot
because
less fun.
my big concern is that Digimon players already are having like a lot of issues just in terms of getting product in the first place. So it's kind of like Bandai's kicking them while they're down, right? It's like, not only did this set get delayed by 2 weeks, but now the deck that you wanted to build 2 weeks ago, you can only play for 2.5 weeks.
Yeah, I guess right now it's brutal, as you say, but hopefully it's a hopefully later it will be okay. Right now it sucks. But right now a lot of things suck. It's the way of the world, you know. Like what's one more thing that sucks on top of everything else that's going on?
The last thing I want to talk about now is that I want to kind of bring the commander conversation full circle. And I wanted us right now in this moment, see if we can build a commander equivalent to Digimon.
Oh my god. People have tried to do this. I've seen people trying to do this because Commander's so popular, Digimon comes out and there's a certain mind that immediately is like, how do I do Commander in Digimon?
So let's talk about Digimon and the theoretical attempt to convert the concept of Commander into this space.
Yeah.
How do we do it?
Ooh, okay. Well, I guess you got to get at what's the heart of Commander. The bigger deck. First thing, you go from 60 to 100 in Magic. So we started with 50 in Digimon. We got to amp it up. Say, what do you want to take it up to? 70, 80? 80 is probably like...
80, it's not quite, 80 sounds like a nice round number.
Yeah, not quite double. Definitely a lot more. Singleton as well. Highlander. Only one of each card. So you got to be limited. With the 1.0 card pool, very hard to get together 80 cards without any doubles. But hopefully,
very difficult now. But
as the game goes,
we're talking in the future.
Mm-hmm. I think the big thing is that you need a sort of a commander, so a Digimon probably that runs your deck, is the lead of the deck, and you should always have access to that. So that's going to be sort of not necessarily start in your hand, but maybe it starts in a special zone, like a partner zone or something. It's partners in the Digimon anime. They have partners. So let's call it the partner zone, maybe, that it starts there. You pick a Digimon as that's your Digimon partner. It thematically works. Digimon's already doing this.
Very on brand. So
you're limited to the color of that Digimon.
Yeah, so just one straight color.
Yeah. I mean, the color thing is a big part of Commander. It's a big part of the limits. You've got to build within the limitations of only being having access to a certain number of cards. You can't just use everything. So I feel like you're limited to the color of that Digimon. So if your partner is, let's say, War Greymon, the red one, you can only use red. I think that's probably pretty fair. Multiplayer, the other big aspect of Commander, the fact that it's not just one-on-one, it's a free-for-all with 3 or more people. Where you run into problems is this guy, the memory gauge. That's where it becomes
that's what I was talking about. Like how can you translate that? Because there's been some discussion and talks online where people have tried to create these like tag team formats or like these multiplayer formats, and I want to know, for what you've kind of experienced personally, how does the memory gauge translate multiplayer? Does it just go towards the next pair clockwise to you, and then memory just keeps kind of going around the table?
I think it's just got to keep going clockwise, or the direction of play. I guess that's part and parcel.
I think that adds the fun to it, right? So it's a case of, and then if buddy to the right of you, if you're all just actively choking him on a regular basis just to screw him over specifically, just because you've got a vendetta against him, and then I feel like that could be a fun little. And
then we see where maybe that will inherit the limitations, begin to change the format, because maybe any card that says gain blank memory on it all of a sudden becomes way better, because you're trying to use the limited amount of memory you get to compete with 3 opponents. Because you can make alliances and stuff. That's one of the big fun parts of Commander. But one of the other things is that you're playing with cards that are meant to sort of perform 5 security attacks and then 1 more attack for the win. Now all of a sudden those same cards have to perform 15 security attacks and then an extra 3 attacks in order to get to the win. So like all of a sudden your security attack plus 1 is probably looking a lot better, because you've got to get through way more security. All of a sudden.
Now in Commander, can you distribute the damage across multiple players, or do you declare one specific target?
You declare one specific target. When you're attacking, you declare a target. there are cards that sort of allow you to distribute damage as effects, but in terms of attacks, no, you pick a person.
Okay. So I was gonna say, if you had like security tech +1, could you be like, the first check is here, but the second check is over here?
Oh man, but we're making our own. Oh, but then how blockers work? I don't know. There's a lot to think about.
So we've determined 80 card decks, 3 moves clockwise.
Yeah.
Basically, that you declare a single player to attack. You can't distribute your damage accordingly, and you get 1 partner. And your deck has to be built regarding that specific color of that partner. Now, how does the partner work? Can you choose to put it into play through hard drop, or can you choose to digivolve it if you have the necessary base form underneath to put it into play?
I think it's more fun if it's just like it was in your hand. So you can hard drop it, or you can digivolve it, I think is the best way to do it. So many minutiae of Commander that I'm just realizing as we're talking about this, I forgot to talk about. One of the limiters on your Commander, because it can always return to the command zone. So you'll always have access to it. Like if it gets destroyed, you can say, I return it to the command zone. And then it goes back to that sort of zone outside the game that you can cast it from again or play it from. So one of the limitations on that is that yeah. But you have to keep track of how many times you play it, because each time you play it, it costs an extra 2 mana to play. So it gets more expensive every time. So you can't just keep like replaying it over and over again. Because eventually it will become prohibitively expensive. It'll cost you like 20 extra mana to play, and you just can't keep doing that every time. So I guess there's got to be, otherwise you just play Puppetmon as your partner and just have a Puppetmon all the time. Like there's got to be some kind of limitation on how many times, right? That's what immediately came to my mind when you were talking about whether you could hard draw stuff. Because that would suck.
Oh.
I've
already seen the power of Max Geppetto Chimera.
Oh yeah, we saw that and it sucked. And then I went to my locals the next week and played against someone who played 3 Puppetmon against me in a row, and it sucked to play against, as it turns out.
And you were just like, come here.
Yeah. Oh, it's brutal. So there's got to be some kind of limit on how many times you can play it to make it more expensive or something.
I'm sitting here, and the reason I ask about this whole Commander thing is that I'm wondering if Digimon as a whole will be willing to explore alternative formats. Like, I know asking this now, since we're so early in the game's infancy, is kind of a long shot, but I'm always curious how game designers might attempt to try to spice things up or kind of keep things new and fresh by introducing alternative formats. And I wondered if something like that could potentially come into the fray. And since Commander, as you said, is a kind of a fan-created and fan-supported format, if there were other kind of fan-supported formats that we could actually come together and create, and potentially if Digimon maybe caught on and Bandai caught on, they'd be like, we like that. We'll take that. Thank you.
I guess the main takeaway from the story of Commander is to remember that although when you buy Digimon cards and put your deck together, there are rules for this game. Ultimately, what you're buying are game pieces. And you can use them however you want. The people you're playing with are happy to play by the same rules, because it's no fun if you're playing by rules that no one else is playing by. Provided everybody's on the same page. Oh, ugh, get that thing away. Provided everybody's on the same page, ultimately they're just game pieces. And if you're all having fun, you can play the game however you want to play. So I would love it if people were to take this as kind of like an inspiration to go away and start maybe experimenting with different ways to play Digimon. I know me and my friend have already been talking about different ways that we can play, just in terms of deck building. Like we wanted to set ourselves a challenge if we both go away and make a deck in each color with the cards that we have just lying around. And like the challenge is that we've got to we'll roll the dice at the start of every match, and 1 to 6, and then you just play whatever turns up. You're not picking and choosing. So yeah, ultimately they're game pieces, and as we get more comfortable with these cards and with this game, I think we will see a bit more experimentation, as evidenced by the fact that immediately people were trying to make Commander at Digimon. Like, it was one of the first things I ever saw on the subreddit was, hey, I came up with this idea for a Commander format in Digimon. What do you guys think? It was literally like, before I saw where to buy it or what's the release date, it was, how do you make Commander in Digimon? So I think there's definitely, and I think we'll get some of that from official sources as well, because I know, looking through the official tournament rules, as I did, because that's what I think a fun Saturday night is. I read the official tournament guidelines from Bandai. They had rulings for draft and sealed formats, which we haven't seen anything really about outside of that. But there are rulings, and so they've already set the groundwork in place. So there are going to be other formats. Hopefully, or at least they're
Okay.
already thinking about it, and the fact that people like to do that,
Hmm.
like that's one of the
Yeah.
that's a way that I also really like to play Magic the Gathering, and hopefully we'll one day be able to play Digimon as sealed and draft because that's great fun. Restriction breeds creativity always and in everything, and that includes card games.
Well, it's funny you say that too, because just being on 1.0 as long as we have been,
Mm.
I've found myself creating the wackiest deck combinations with that limited card pool that we have. And I'm constantly just challenging myself to innovate as much as I can and kind of piggyback off of other people's innovations.
Oh yeah.
And I feel like that experience now for having 1.0 as long as we have will definitely help contribute to me being a better deck builder in the future.
You know, there's a little bit of negativity associated with Rookie Rush these days, but what a shining example of like restriction breeding creativity and people thinking outside the box. Like the whole sort of thing about Digimon is that you digivolve your Digimon up and you make these kind of big stacks getting up to level sixes. And the fact that people looked at these cards and was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want
Yeah.
to just play lots of little guys and not digivolve. Immediately going against the grain and going against what the sort of what the game designers are trying to funnel you into and sort of trying to think outside the box and setting restrictions for yourself. Like, no, I don't want to kind of digivolve up. I want to see if I can win with rookies. And it turns out that it's actually really good, which is always the like. Sometimes that happens.
When you have
Sometimes the Magnadramon deck is really good. It's not, but sometimes like, one of those wacky decks actually turns out to be something really, really good, and you're never going to find out if you don't sort of be creative and go outside the box and just try stuff. Like that's what I'm over on the podcast. That's what I'm always saying. I'm always asking people to build bad decks. Is one of my big like messages that I'm trying to get people to take home, and like that it's okay to build bad decks because it means that you're building stuff and trying stuff, and eventually the process of doing that, you learn and you grow, and eventually you get good at it. And the first step towards getting good at something is being bad at it. So like, there's no shame in building something that doesn't work because you learn lessons from it and you get better at it. And limiting yourself and setting restrictions is a great way to build bad decks in a way that you learn how to like eventually build good decks. Like saying, I'm not going to use any secret rares or super rares, for example. I'm only going to use rare to common. That is a great limitation to put on yourself. Build something that sucks, but then like slowly build up towards building something kind of good. And I guess to bring it back around to Magic the Gathering, that's what I love about all of the various formats, and especially the player-made formats, because the player-made formats and the more popular official formats are all about kind of the official made formats seem to be about like opening it up. Like they'll make legacy and historic and all these kinds of things where it's about use all the cards that we've ever made. But then when players make formats like Commander and that sort of thing, it's use a very, very limited card pool. And I find that, yeah, people love building in restrictions and people love figuring out challenges and doing stuff in a kind of limited way. And that can be really, really fun when you set those restrictions on yourself. Ooh, that was really
I 100% agree.
No,
that's fine. I understand. So I think we're good to pretty much wrap it up here.
Okay.
So thanks for coming out. Did you have any questions that you wanted to ask me about the whole Magic versus Digimon shtick as a whole?
Ooh, I hadn't really considered it. I was just enjoying being in kind of the the interviewee seat for a change. I guess from your experience with Magic, such as it is, are there any aspects of Magic or anything that isn't currently sort of existing in some form in Digimon that you would like to see, not necessarily replicated, but is there anything that Magic's doing that you think, oh, I think if Digimon did its own version of this could be really cool? Like we've talked about Multicolor, for example.
Yeah, there is, and it's the artifact system. I would definitely like some sort of extra, like I can play a Digivice, for example, and then that Digivice will let me do something, or I could play some sort of token or memento that a certain character has or has had throughout the course of the series. I don't know if you remember many of the cards from the old Hyper Coliseum, the original Digimon card game, but you would play things like tags and crests into play, and then those would, or Digivices, and they would stay in play, and then they would allow you to achieve different goals, different means. I think having like an item that you can put into play that or even something even similar to Yu-Gi-Oh would be like, or Pokemon, like a field spell or a stadium, I think would be really interesting.
Yeah.
Just a new type of colored card that allows you to play options from your hand without necessarily having to have a Digimon or a Tamer in play as well. But also just something that gives you a static effect in play that you can kind of reap the advantage of down the road. So something similar to what an artifact, I guess, would be, but I'm not quite sure how that would be designed exactly. It would basically just be some sort of permanent option, I guess, in that respect.
Yeah, that would be tricky. But maybe, I guess, something like a field spell that affects both sides of the board. We've seen a lot of stuff that like buffs up your own stuff or kind of negatively affects your opponent's things, but we haven't seen, not that I can think of, and admittedly, as I've said, I haven't looked very far forward in the Japanese sets. I'm kind of focused on 1.0 and a little bit on 1.5. I don't know that we've seen many effects that are symmetrical, I guess you would call it, affects both players in the same way.
Yeah.
And then giving you another challenge of like, okay, so there's this negative effect that affects us both. How can I use it so that it's better for me than it is for my opponent? And that could be really cool. I would love to see something like that.
I think that is the mechanic or similar structure for Magic that I think I would love to see in a game like Digimon, because I feel like the roots are already there. We just need to plant the seed and get it growing to some capacity.
Yeah.
But yeah. Oh, so thanks so much for joining me tonight, Connor.
Oh, my pleasure.
Did you want to plug your channel again now, just so everyone knows again where to find you?
Yeah, I suppose I can do that. So the big thing is the Memory Gauge podcast. You can find it in most places that you can find your podcast. So Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, all those places. There's also on our website, memorygaugePodcast.buzzsprout.com is the other place that you can find it. You can also follow me on Twitter at ConnorEFMG. I like to do a few things over there, and I always plug the podcast as well. So if you're following me on Twitter, you'll never miss an episode either. So another good place to go, I suppose, to get information about that and some other stuff. I like to interact with people over on Twitter. I'm big on interaction, and that's one of those places where that can really happen. So
wonderful. I will be putting that link, as well as any other links to your Twitter as well, into the description of this video as well. So if anyone would be interested in following you, which I highly recommend, they can do so.
Oh,
thanks so much for watching, everybody.
Yeah.
This has been Mike again, aka from Overground, and this has been episode 5 of How I Became a DigiDestined, where we talked about Magic the Gathering. If you like this video and like what we do here at the Overground, please consider subscribing and liking and commenting and all that jazz. You've heard it a million times before. But if you have anything that you like to say based on, or to me or to Connor, or based on anything that we've discussed today, leave a comment and I will get back to you, and I will keep in touch with Connor so we can keep that discussion going. So thanks so much, everyone, and we'll see you in the next one.